Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm Cathal, that's Peter, and today we're going to be talking about revising our essays. So we've reached the point in the semester where you probably have a couple essays under your belt, or you're writing your first big one for midterms. And it's times like this when writing centers sometimes get swamped, or you're working with a colleague in the class and you kind of just want an extra set of eyes on your paper. And so I thought we'd go over today some strategies to either do self-revision worksheets or kind of like exercises to logically go through your essay, or that you can do with a partner and swap papers. This is something I do generally in most of my classes, at least once. I require students to do it so they can see what another person's kind of thinking is. Because in this process of revision, you're sitting down with someone's first draft, maybe first 0.5 draft, and their thoughts are still sort of on the page and haven't been fully solidified into solid writing yet. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I think everything you said is very true. And I guess I would just remind students, both at Fordham and elsewhere, that like professors will always take revisions, right? A lot of them expect it, right? And they will be willing to raise your grade if you turn in a better revision. And even if revision isn't a part of your class, I have a hard time imagining the professor who's going to say no to the genuine student who has authentically brought a revision of past work. So I really feel as though you have nothing to lose here.
Absolutely. And even if you're not writing for a class specifically, say you're working on your graduate school applications or law school applications, medical school stuff, this is the kind of thing that maybe you don't know someone else who's gone through the process but you know someone else who is currently also applying. Swapping papers and kind of going through a worksheet like this can be really, really useful. So without further ado, I thought we would just jump on over and kind of walk through the process that I like to have my students do when they're looking at their own writing.
Great, let's do it.
Okay. So this is a peer review sheet. Ideally, if I'm doing this in a class, I'll have my students sit and read the essay before they get the sheet. Just so that they're fully focused on the other person's writing and in that person's mind for that little bit. I always go for physical copies because when you've got a pen in your hand and a physical piece of paper, you just mark things and jot stuff alongside the writing itself that you'll then come back to in later comments. So
yeah, if I could just reemphasize that, things are lost on the page. And I know we'll get to this in a moment, but I would kick myself if I ever turned in an important work without first editing it in a hard copy.
For sure. So let's just go over the basic idea here. Read an essay, jot down first impressions in the margin, circle any grammatical errors, and then put the essay aside and start writing down on a separate sheet of paper these kind of steps. First one, I think this is the most important. Rewrite in your own words one sentence that you believe best explains the argument or claim for the paper. Now, this is a key because once you've read something all the way through, you should know why you read it and sort of what it was trying to do. A lot of the times, a student might be writing to a prompt, just answering a prompt, without making a specific argument or claim, just kind of hitting the points. And so just with this first little step, you can kind of figure out, hey, do I even have an argument that's specific to my essay?
This first step here is a great way to ensure that the essay isn't simply summary. There should be a contestable claim in there.
For sure. And because it's contestable, step 2, explain why you believe it's the argument. And to explain this, you're going to need to necessarily pull in what some of the evidence the author was using. What points were they trying to make? What claims underneath this claim? What is it residing on? And after that, what do you think the author wants their audience to think or do? Just in a general sense, what is this paper asking of the reader? Does the author want you to believe something specific? For instance, does this character in a certain book stand for this emotion? Or can we learn this by reading this way? Or is it something a little bit more specific? We should invest more in schools because blank. And kind of alongside that, does the title support it? Is it being very clear what the author actually wants to have happen?
Or even more generally, is there a title, right? Essay number 3 or paper on Joseph Conrad is never a good title, right? Your argument should begin with the title.
Absolutely. Peter, why don't you try out number 4?
Yeah, this is a great point. So I'm glad to jump at this one. What could the author do to make you trust, believe, and or care about this topic more? Have they established why their argument matters? And this is crucial because you want to remember that assignments aren't just to check the box and to complete the assignment, right? Especially in writing and rhetoric, you want to draw your reader in, make them care, inspire them, make them angry, stir some sort of emotion. And so a confession here, I know for myself, very often when I'm writing research papers, I'll sort of get lost in the close reading and lost in getting my evidence on the page. And then I'll print it out and I'll take a pen and I'll go through to edit. And I'll realize that I'll have paragraphs that are missing those sentences that aren't just giving the evidence, but are reminding my reader why that evidence matters. And so I'll often jot down those sentences in pen and add them in later. This tactic may work for you.
Absolutely. And this is also true going back to the sort of kind of personal statements for graduate schools or internships, things like that. Establishing why someone should choose you or why you should be going to law school or medical school, that kind of gives the purpose behind the personal statement. In many cases, section 4 here is what a personal statement is about. Why do we care about you? Why do we care that you should be doing this?
Yeah, great point. And Cathal, as I'm hearing you walk us through point number 4, it dawns on me that the person reading your personal statement is implicitly going to be asking themselves number 4. So you want to ask yourself the question and answer it before they do.
Absolutely. And jumping off of that, what kind of evidence are you using to kind of make us feel that way? And does that evidence fit whatever appeal you're doing? So say you're writing a personal statement and you have this emotional argument. Well, are you using evidence that kind of draws on emotion? Are you talking about cases in your life or things that you've done that kind of get that empathy and ethos or pathos argument going? But maybe you want to talk about the best way to use tax money in your local district. Well, maybe an emotional argument's not the best there. Maybe you should be using something a little bit more logical or data driven.
Yeah, Cathal, those are great things to remember. And I suppose one thing to add would be variety of evidence, right? If you're keeping track of the kinds of evidence and you see that it's just 7 appeals to logos and we're ignoring ethos and pathos, then you might want to think about diversifying the evidence, if that makes sense to serve the argument.
Yeah. And Peter, in our field in literature, it also just helps the reader kind of stay invested in whatever they're reading. If I'm reading, criticism and it's just references to page numbers and lines, I'm gonna go blind. Like I can't handle that. I need some, talk about the author's life, what was going on at the time. I need, maybe a reference to some other works that were going on, and a little bit more of a variety of the kind of evidence being provided.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
Next up, this is a little bit more of a stepping back away from the argument and looking at actually how the writing sits on the page. Is each paragraph a logical size? So this is something that we get a lot in early composition classes, where we get a 3-sentence paragraph, and well, what's an issue with the 3-sentence paragraph, Peter?
A 3-sentence paragraph probably does not contain all of the elements necessary to persuade the reader what's going on.
Yeah. And oftentimes it's more of a sub-point to another point than it is an actually fully developed idea on its own. So typically we want a paragraph to contain one major point. and within that paragraph contain the majority of that point. So, you know, in this paragraph I'm talking about this, and this paragraph I'm talking about something else. And they might be connected, tied together with a transition, but we should be able to have a sense that, okay, we're leaving this topic and now we're moving to this topic. So if a paragraph takes 8 or 10 sentences to get to that fully exhausting a point, that's better than spending 3 sentences on something that's not fully developed.
Yeah, and in my experience, a 3-sentence paragraph is actually one sentence that's useful that should be added to another paragraph, or it should be footnoted. But in my experience, 3-sentence paragraphs are normally not warranted. And I suppose something else to consider regarding the size of paragraphs would just be that oftentimes your instructors might ask you to compare and contrast, or to consider the alternative point of view. And so if you have a paragraph that is 7 sentences long talking about your point of view, and then the paragraph looking at someone else's point of view that's 3 sentences, it's pretty clear who you agree with, even if you're supposed to be objective here. So something to bear in mind.
Sure, absolutely. That kind of brings us into this idea of limiting the amount of subjects that we have in a paragraph. So 7 is counting, and this is just going through each paragraph and counting how many unique subjects we have. And a subject, remember, is when it's what a sentence is about, the sort of thing performing in a sentence. Now, typically in academic writing, we don't want more than 2 to 4 at the most individual subjects within a paragraph. I aim for the 2 to 3. So in this case, you might be making an argument that, like, this character does something in the book, and the author means this when they're doing it. And I believe that the author is doing that because of this, right? So we've got 3 subjects, and really anything else in there should be sort of subordinate to that. And that way we're communicating exactly what our argument is just via the subjects.
Yeah, great points. And all of this is often what's meant in that very annoying comment that professors will sometimes put on essays, clarify. Right. What that may mean is that you have too many or too few subjects in a paragraph.
Yeah. All right. 8, looking at the logical progression of the essay. And this is once again going back to those transitions and then thinking about, are we getting everything that we need to know at the start to understand what it is that you're actually saying, the new stuff?
Shameless plug here. I think next week, Cathal and Ellis and I, we're going to do a video only talking about this notion of the known new. So making sure that you give the reader A and B before you give them C and D, so we can understand the flow. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned.
Yes, next week. Are there any points, and this is another just kind of basic thing that you should do when you're reading your friend's essay, can you follow their train of thought? And if not, where did they lose you? Are there any points where they're being needlessly repetitive? So anytime you're going over the same ground pointlessly, and anytime you're completely off the rails, make note of those, because those can probably be cut.
In my own experience, Kyle, I don't know if you've had this same experience, but when I print out my essays and edit them with a pen, I always find repetition. And so it's almost like a religious thing I do. Open up thesaurus.com, print out essay, and make sure that my wording is not repetitive. It always works for me, and I'm positive it would work for others as well.
For sure. And there's something to be said about repetition on a sentence level and when you're, doing sort of oral argument and rhetoric. But I think what we mean here more is, are we making the same argument in 2 paragraphs when we could only just make it in 1 and be just as strong as an essay?
Yeah, great point.
Point 10, almost to the very end here. Are you convinced? And it's okay generally to say no. I mean, this is argumentative writing should be an argument. So a yes or a no is valid. But if it is a yes, what convinced you? And if it's a no, what didn't you find convincing and why? And this kind of moves us towards, not only are you evaluating the author's claims how well they're doing a job of persuading you, but it's also starting to get you to think about how you would respond to it, sort of continuing the scholarly conversation.
And regarding this point number 10, if you find that you're not convinced by your own argument, or if a peer says that they're not convinced, don't give up hope. Very often essays are just a couple sentences or maybe a paragraph away from being convincing, if you will. It's sort of a fine line that can be tweaked, moving you towards being convincing. So don't throw up your hands here.
Yeah. And, even if you write something that you're not fully convinced of, there's this thing in science where even if, there's no right answer to an experiment. There's only the answer to an experiment. All it is providing you with more data. So if you've written this out and walked through all of these points that have logic behind them, but you're not convinced, well, that's okay. You can end up going back and saying, even though this is a thing, I don't think this is what the author meant, but this is a way we can look at it. It's not wasted work because you can follow these logical steps. You can kind of walk someone through it, and maybe someone else will read that and be like, no, I am entirely convinced because of this. It's okay to not be fully sure. If you were fully sure, it wouldn't be, again, an argumentative sort of persuasive thing.
Yeah, you're very right there.
All right. And the last step, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the uneven U. And so the last thing I ask my students to do, and what I do with my own essays, is I make an uneven U graph. And I see just how, on an argument level, my essay looks when charted out on this graph.
And for those of you who need a quick refresher, the uneven U is basically, does the paragraph begin in a general manner, move towards being more specific or more precise, mm-hmm. and then sort of zoom out a tad before we get to the end of that paragraph, then setting us up for the next paragraph.
Yeah, and same for the essay. Are we starting with a clear idea of, here's what we're going to be talking about. Here's kind of the framework that we're going to be using. Here's where we're going to go. And then drop down to pure evidence, work our way back up from evidence, paragraphs 2 or 3 or pages 3 or 4, and then work our way all the way back to theoretical. Here's our argument. Here's why it matters. Here's where further scholarship can go.
Yeah, excellent.
All right. So we're going to have all of these steps copied down below for anyone who wants to use them in their own class or print them out, trade papers with a friend or colleague of yours. And we'd encourage pretty much everyone to do this. I still do this in my own PhD work, but I also assign it to students that I have from high schools that are coming into colleges so that they can start thinking a little bit more critically about their own writing.
Yeah, great points, Cathal. And just as a way to end things here, I would remind Fordham students who are watching this video, do come to the writing centers. I am the director of the writing center at Westchester. Cathal directs his own writing center. Our colleague Ellis does, and revision is a great thing to do in a writing center appointment. We almost guarantee you a sort of better, more organized paper. Yeah, so I'll say that.
Absolutely. Bring this sheet along with you and work through it with your colleague or with one of our tutors. Anyway, that'll be it for us for now. Have a lovely midterms, and everyone stay cool out there.
Good luck. See you.